Hi everyone, welcome back to B2B Unplugged. This is episode 2, and today we'll be talking about what is brand, a founder's guide. So we're going to be diving into the importance of understanding, what that means for founders, the things they need to think about, what the challenges are, and kind of going to see where it goes. Really, I think there's a lot to talk about with brand. So again, many follow episodes on from this, but yeah, we're going to want to dive into it. I think one of the main issues I see with brand is just a lack of understanding of what it is and the part it plays, in growing a business. I think there's a big misunderstanding of what brand is. Everyone always says, "Oh, it's a logo, right?" But it's obviously a lot more than that.
Yeah, I think if you're not a marketer and you're not a you're not a techie marketer that subscribes to, I don't know, Marketing Week or something like that, and you spend your time thinking and looking at brand strategy, then potentially it's forgivable to mistake branding and brand. So that there's the distinction for those, I guess, people that aren't in the know, and that might be marketers, it might be founders, it might be other people, or whoever. Is that branding is your brand colors, your identity, I suppose, from a visual perspective, what you look like to the outside world, and brand is, I guess, the way that I always like to describe it is how it makes you feel. So, and that sounds a little bit wishy-washy, but I guess it's a how you want people to talk about you when you're not in the room.
Yeah, I
So
was
it's
going to say,
the lasting impression that you leave people, and how how is your client base going to talk about you to people, to their peers, if you're not around, or how is somebody going to say, oh, I heard about such and such brand and they're doing X, Y, and Z. That's your brand. In reality, that's your brand strategy.
yeah, absolutely. It's that first. It's the way that makes you feel. What's your first thing you think when you hear of a name? And I have loads of, especially in the B2B space and in SaaS, there's loads of great brands out there that I really feel that if I hear their name, it brings back memories of interactions I've had with them and
Mm.
really great time. And one great example is, in the peak of Drift with, David Cancel, Dave Gerhardt, I felt they really nailed that Drift as a brand.
Mm.
What it meant, I've still got their books. I'm really emotionally connected to it.
Yeah.
But I'm not connected to their logo.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, if they have a rebrand, you're not going to be like, "Oh my god, I forget these guys." Like you're still connected to their brand. Yeah, for a lot of marketers, that's HubSpot. I know a lot of founders get frustrated with that name because it's like, well, these guys are just expensive. So from a founder's perspective, HubSpot is like the expensive tool that I'm told I have to have, but I don't really understand why I need to have it. But from a marketer's perspective, it's really useful because a lot a lot of marketers, I think, have sort of not necessarily been brought up on the content, but they dive deep into the work that HubSpot do. So outside of the tool that they build, they have a huge content library of assets that are useful for marketers, templates, guides, blogs, everything else that helps keep us on top of our game and helps us really understand, what the rest of the market might be thinking, and help us do our jobs. And that, for me at least, it leaves that exact same feeling. For me, when I think about HubSpot, I think it's almost like a relief thing. It's like, oh, these guys have helped me so much. Where I've had a challenge before and I've been like, how am I going to do this? And what you inevitably end up googling the question or something, and
Yeah.
the first thing that comes up is a HubSpot blog that says top 5 tips to develop this or whatever, and you're like, oh, fantastic, I'll give that a go.
Yeah.
And that is your brand strategy. That's HubSpot's brand strategy, is to be useful to people when they need you. And it
Exactly.
leaves that
It is
positive emotion.
it's a promise to customers, isn't it?
Yeah,
That's what that brand is saying. And I trust HubSpot. If I'm ever in doubt, they've promised that they're going to, deliver the sort of, that value and help me become a better marketer, whether that's through education or through their fantastic tool,
exactly.
which I feel, every marketer under the sun uses. I mean, we're using HubSpot. I've
Yeah,
used pretty much every single role, and it's most likely because of that, that
yeah,
brand
exactly.
they've built on, that promise that they've delivered.
And the opposite's also true, right? If you have an interaction with a brand and it's not particularly brilliant, you might have an interaction with a company that you were sold the dream of a product or whatever, and then their customer service is awful, or the product isn't what you expected, or something like that. That also leaves a bad impression in your mind. And it might be years later you go into a different role when they happen to have that product. Immediately you have that feeling in your gut, and you're like, oh my god, I'm going to have to deal with these guys again. Now, they might have changed completely, their product might be a lot better or whatever else, but you immediately have that emotional reaction because of how you remember your interaction with them previously. That's equally their brand. And so it's important as a marketer and a business to be able to understand how you manage both of those things, how you manage reputation, both in the positive sense and in the negative sense. I think it's a really important part of marketing that I think a lot of B2B marketers don't necessarily spend a lot of time thinking about, for whatever reason. Either they're not allowed into at the table to talk about these things, or they're too focused on the other end of the table with driving leads and growth and whatever else. But it's a really, really important part of thing that can have a negative impact on the rest of your business if you don't control it properly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think brand is kind of it's important to get right because it's a guiding light for everything. I think you mentioned that, you touched on customer service there. We all need to be abiding by what that brand means to customers, and what, the values and everything behind it. It guides. It can guide every decision almost in a way. Does this support our brand? Any sort of any partnerships. Do they align with our brand? Even to an extent of taking on customers. Sometimes there is that discussion that could be had: do we want to work with this client? Does it align with our brand? And in previous roles, many years ago, for certain things happening elsewhere in the world, we've turned down massive opportunities because it wouldn't align with our brand and our values. I think that's the crazy impact that it actually has on a business. It's not just
100%. 100%. So important. I think a lot of companies, I don't think, even really understand what their brand is. They don't have it distilled into sort of a set of core values, and I think sometimes that's sometimes job one is, if you're a marketer going into a new role or something like that, and you're looking at the organization and you see some of these challenges of sort of inconsistency of delivery, or difficulty with customers understanding messaging, or even your salespeople understanding exactly what your core messaging is, there could be a symptom of the problem, which is we haven't really got a brand strategy. And it's important to potentially then at that stage is to take the senior stakeholders of the business through a process of who are we, what do we believe, and what message are we trying to deliver to the market. And sometimes that's as simple as sitting down with the founders of the business and saying, why did you start the business? What was the problem you're trying to solve? What are the values that you want the people who work for you to embody, and then distilling that into sort of 5 or 6 values or something like that you want everybody to believe in. And that can have a transformational impact on the way that you deliver customer service, product strategy, brand marketing, sales, everything in a sense.
Consistent messaging. It's really big. And I think maybe a point there is really understanding your target audiences as well, and what's important to them, and how that then merges in with what's important to you. You need to find that middle ground. Yeah, it is a tricky thing to get right. But even whether you're a founder or whether you're a business, that is 20 years old but still hasn't quite nailed it, there's still time to fix that issue and to
100%.
redefine your brand and go from there. I think all the stuff you listed there is really important, because I think sometimes people jump in and say, "Oh, we're doing a brand awareness campaign," but they haven't got that strategy.
Yeah.
So it's not a brand awareness campaign. It's just you're just kind of just making noise and tagging it as a brand awareness campaign. Is that just doing those activities? Is that going to help people, remember who you are, and build that emotional connection? It's probably not. But if you have got 100%. If you have got that very clear strategy behind the brand, then that's when it actually becomes a brand awareness campaign, because what the effect that you're trying to get from that, and it may not be leads from a brand awareness campaign. Obviously, there's always some coming from that, but I think.
Yeah, I think this is the one where I think founders, or I guess non-commercial people, potentially get hung up on the most. Is I get why brand's important, but it's not driving me leads. So why am I focusing on it? And it's a really difficult question. A lot of marketers really struggle to answer this question. And I think there's no perfect answer to it necessarily. I think that the answer that I tend to try and give to founders is there's two ways that you need to think about the commercialization of your business. There's the short term, which is I need leads and revenue now because I need to pay the bills and I need to grow the business and I need to keep shareholders happy. And then there's the long term, which is what's going to happen in 2 years. If we keep just going down this funnel with short term and running around in circles trying to find stuff, what's going to happen in 2 years when all of a sudden that's not working anymore? And that's brand really is planning for the long term. It's demonstrating that you're consistent and you have a good reputation. You're listening to your customer base. You're understanding the market and how it moves and everything else, and you're doing so in a way that is growing your business. And that is brand strategy. You can't directly link a lead target to the way that brand works, but it's your reputation. If you want to have a solid reputation in a couple of years' time and you want to build a sustainable business, then you need to think about your brand strategy and the way that this works. And one of the things that I think you briefly touched on that's really important part of that is your orientation as a business. If you're not customer orientated as a business in 2024, I don't really know what you're doing. I think you have to listen to your market. You have to listen to who are the people in the market you're trying to sell the product to. The prospects in your existing customer base. You need to listen to them. And people will always say, well, Henry Ford said if I listened to my customers that they said that they wanted a faster horse rather than a car. It's sort of true. That talks to a point about innovation, I suppose. But you do have to listen to people about what they want and what they're trying to, what challenges they have, what problems they're trying to solve, and then you help to innovate to solve those problems. But I think that's one of the most important parts of brand strategy is your orientation as a business. If your orientation as a business is purely sales, you're probably not going to get brand strategy and you're not going to focus on it enough. But if you're truly orientated towards your customer base and the market, then you can see why that's important because it's about your reputation.
Make no mistake, being customer centric is bloody hard. I think a lot of people like to think they're customer centric and will say that in their all hands meetings and stuff, but they're probably not. They want to be, but it's a really big commitment to actually do it, and you have to make some bold decisions to really continue on that path of actually being customer centric. So it's a biggie. You reminded me of a case study actually. I have done a quick Google to make sure I don't make up any stats, but you talk about that sort of short and long term. And during the pandemic, you probably remember the story about Airbnb because they basically reduced their paid or performance channels, but because they'd focused on brand and had a very clear brand strategy. It says that Airbnb's traffic levels reached 95% of what they had been in 2019 before the pandemic.
Yeah,
and
crazy.
I'm not going to click into it and read everything else. I might drop a link in the comments for anyone who wants to look into that case study further. But it's a prime example of performance that are short-term tactics, and they switched it all off and we're fine.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's not to say that you as a startup business in the accountancy software space or something can turn off all your paid media and be absolutely fine. No. Airbnb has spent millions building a reputation, but it does demonstrate the importance of your brand strategy and building that reputation for the long term. Because when stuff like a global pandemic happens, they're still okay because they've got that great brand association.
Absolutely. That's my notes. So I think we've touched on components of a brand just loosely, but just to be super clear, there's a visual identity, which is logo, colors, typography, all of that stuff. That is a part of a brand. It's not totally separate. It's brand voice and messaging. I think brand voice is particularly interesting as well. It's a really big commitment to stick to. If that's forming part of your brand, you have to make sure that you've got the right skills and you're ready to commit to that. In a previous role, I won't say which, but I really struggled because I was the internal copywriter, and we altered our tone of voice to be super creative, and almost to the point where it slowed things down, and we had to bring in someone else who could meet that demand. to produce that type of content, because I couldn't do it, and I could do it, but it took me a long time. In the previous sort of tone of voice that we had for that for the brand, it was very casual, quite fun, and I could manage it. But then when we shifted and we committed to this thing, it was a really really hard thing to do, and I think they've reverted back now. So it's quite an interesting thing where they realised,
Yeah.
wow, this is really difficult. So that's interesting. Thing
Yeah,
I've
I
learned
guess it's
in my career.
that means that talks about your personality, doesn't it? About from a brand perspective, what's your personality?
Mm.
Quite often you see brands they try to go down the quirky route for some reason. I don't particularly know why, but they tend to go, we want to have a personality, so we're going to be quirky,
Yeah,
as opposed to being professional. Maybe it's a symptom of what marketers I don't know what marketers see in the world or something like that. But they look at brand voice and they think, we need to stand out, so we need to be different and funny. It's not necessarily true. I don't think. I think it's about who your
mm.
market is and understanding that. But
Yeah. And knowing what
but
your
yeah,
customer.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, what do they want? It depends who they are. If they're corporate lawyers, they probably don't want to be talked down to. Um,
Yeah,
but if they're creative millennials, then potentially they want that more sort of fun quirkiness,
absolutely.
and they want to engage in a brand that feels like them and feels like they're having a conversation with a peer. So really depends on who you're talking to. But I think tone of voice is really important. It's really important to have that conversation across the company, not just within the marketing team, but within the C-suite or within sort of other other parts of leadership or other parts of customer service or something like that. Who are we? Who are we talking to? How do we want to sound?
Mm.
But you also have to make sure that it's repeatable. You have to make sure that whoever picks up your brand guidelines can look at something and say, I understand what our personality is and how I can write to make
Yeah,
sure that I'm getting the point across. If your brand's tone is the tone of your copywriter, if it's okay, Scott developed our brand tone and therefore he's the only person that can write for our business, then there's a problem.
yeah,
Because if, God forbid, you get hit by a bus, all of a sudden our brand
yeah.
tone is gone. So, whilst that probably wouldn't be somebody's first fault if you got hit by a bus, Scott, it would be a problem that somebody has to solve. So, yeah, touch wood.
Yeah. I'll be very mindful of buses for the next period. Um, I think it's just going on to commitment as well, in sort of customer experience. I think is a really big element of a
Yeah,
brand, because every single touch point, whether that's the first touch, first inquiry, what happens after that, first, your onboarding experience, everything, all of those touch points need to be aligned and consistent. So it's a really really big project, and I think, like you said, one bad interaction or one interaction that might be slightly misaligned can cause a
yeah,
big impact. I think that's why we really need to invest and get the right team, right people, right commitment to be able to build all of that and focus on it.
100%.
Even right down to product development, it has a big part to play in that.
Yeah,
And I think there's some fantastic. I've worked with some fantastic, brand teams that have run really really great workshops. And the first time I experienced it changed my perspective on brand really early on. I thought, wow, okay, this is all starting to make sense. So I think, don't. My advice to sort of founders and business owners is, don't sit there and try and do it by yourself. Get the right people in to help guide that, and it'll make a huge difference.
100%. Yeah, if it's just done done in isolation, it's not. Generally speaking, it's not a proper brand because you have to involve the key people in your business. The person that's leading the customer success team is the person that's going to be teaching the first call responders how to speak to a customer, or what our response is to something.
Mm.
The product owners are the people that are developing, quite often are developing copy that is for release notes or something like that.
Yeah.
These are people that have to be brought on board to what the brand tone is and the strategy, and it has to make sense to them.
Mm.
If it's just noise and it's just a marketing have spent 2 weeks writing a document that is just fluff and I don't get it, then you've wasted your time. You have to be able to. Your job as a marketer is to be able to understand your audience and communicate for them. And if your audience is an internal one, you have to understand what's important to that product owner, what they're trying to achieve, and how do I help them do their job better. And I think that's often the part that we as marketers miss, is we look at the problem and we think, well, these guys, they don't understand what I'm trying to do. I'm adding loads of value here. You're like, well, you might be, but you have to explain it to them because they're not trained marketers. Equally, if a product owner came to you and said, I'm writing this in this code language versus this code language, you'd be like, I don't care, I don't get it. Just show me the product. And that's the difference, I think. But yeah, it's super important to take people along the journey with you, and make sure that whatever you develop is developed with them in mind, and it is a representation of you as a company.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I think obviously what we're really passionate about is telling a brand story. You've got your brand, you've got everything nailed down. How do you then, effectively tell your story, out to the masses? And it's a really big, it's the next step, isn't it? I think that's where a lot of people need hand holding and just go out and just start doing random activities. There is that core narrative, right, that you need to try and stick to.
Yeah, it's a challenging one because I think, like you say, quite often, what people try and do is they say, okay, well, let's go and do this activity and this activity and this activity, and it has a feeling of being disconnected from a prospect perspective. They might look at that and be like, I don't get it. They might not know why they don't get it, but it's because there's not a succinct story that you're trying to tell in the market. And this goes back to your values, which is, why was the business started? What problem are we solving? What solution are we trying to offer to solve that problem? And what what the net results are? What's the relief that we give customers to help them with that? Developing that story arc in a way that helps the market understand exactly what you're offering and why it's distinct, I think is really important. Storytelling is really hard, but I think done well can be quite transformational for businesses, because it's the difference between, if you're in a crowded marketplace, it's the difference between you just being another service provider to you being somebody that somebody can really resonate with. Yep. So it has the element of being really powerful if it's done well.
Yeah, really, really core element. I think one thing I think we need to note with brand is the ongoing management and flexibility and adaptability, because certain things might happen in an industry or in the world that might cause you to actually need to change and pivot. I don't think you need to necessarily say this is our brand and this is going to be it forever. You need to be able to take the risk. Pandemic's a prime example. Lots of businesses had to offer new services and pivot, and whether they actually pivoted their brand to match that is something that I don't think a lot of people did. I know we in one of the roles I did during the pandemic, I felt we repositioned quite hard, because it affected our service. There was a new normal, with flexible working, and we had to if we didn't pivot and we stuck to our normal brand values, messaging, everything, they would have really struggled. So it's that your brand's not going to be the same forever. You will adapt and grow and change, and that's why it's important to get, as long as you've got a really good understanding of brand, you can do all of those things really well and not worry about it.
100%. It's super important to be flexible. I guess it's also important to make sure that you're not pivoting for the sake of pivoting, but if something comes along that means that you have to listen and understand your market, then absolutely, a global pandemic is a prime example of that. Hopefully we never have to go through one again, but it's a prime example of, in February 2020, who had used the video conferencing tool. Not many people had really used it to that extent. A couple of months later, everybody was living their life on those things, on Zoom and Teams and House Party. I remember doing poker nights with my friends on House Party and quiz nights with my family and things like that. And all of a sudden, these things that you'd never used before all of a sudden were relevant. And Microsoft had to rebadge a lot of their products so that to develop Teams, basically the first version of Teams was a rebadge of Skype and something else, I think. And that's them listening to what's going on in the world, rather than just sitting there and saying, "No, everyone will be back in the office in 2 weeks, so we're just gonna we'll just be fine. We'll just crack on." So yeah, you have to listen to your market, and you have to not be scared to make those bold changes where it's required to do so.
Yeah, absolutely. And the ones who do make decisions, the quickest often prevail. I'll just remind you of something that I want to talk about. I can't believe I didn't note it down. The term rebranding gets thrown around quite a lot, and I think a lot of the time I see someone go, "You've not rebranded. You've refreshed your visual identity." In a way, I know I've said that obviously the visual stuff is a part of your brand, but I don't. I think maybe there needs to be a better way to have a distinction between the two.
Yeah, I think there's also
controversial. I get it, and my main one is nitpicking, but I think you've not rebranded.
It's slightly nitpicky, I guess, but there is a distinction. I think the distinction is, are you just updating your color palette, or are you changing your identity? I think it's probably a technical one.
I think I'm being nitpicky, but it's always something I think about. So
I guess it's a difference between, are you making a significant change to the way that you go out to market, or are you just changing a purple to a lighter purple?
Yeah,
would be a difference. Also, sometimes I think sometimes in my experience, approaching a business with a rebrand project can be met with some skepticism. Why are we spending X amount of money on changing our identity? I don't get it. So sometimes calling it a brand refresh can help it land a little bit better. We need to refresh our brand for the modern world and everything else, rather than we're going to spend 18 months doing a complete rebrand of everything. It's going to cost you 50 grand or whatever it's going to cost you. So sometimes it's just semantics, but ultimately the things that are, as a marketer, I think those things evolve naturally all the time anyway. Your messaging as a brand should probably always be evolving a little bit. Your tone will evolve naturally as your market changes. The only things that don't really are sort of your visual branding, but they do every now and again. People always come up with weird and quirky new ways of changing their branding and things like that.
Absolutely. And I love it when people revert back to an old visual identity. It's something I'm really passionate about. Looking on LinkedIn and going, I'm going to set a reminder in my calendar for 6 months' time. I'm going to just check to see if they've reverted to loads of examples. I think MailChimp even they randomly went to Intuit something else, and then MailChimp's disappeared for a bit, and it's back.
Yeah, then they came back. Yeah, I know it's not B2B, but I like a lot of the sort of like fashion brands and stuff have gone back to retro branding, haven't they? Like Adidas have gone back to sort of their old branding and things like that, and it's very simplistic and sort of 80s feel about it, which is it's what
nice.
it is.
Yeah. But that's just the connection people have with an actual brand. They
exactly,
and that visual side of it.
But it's probably what they probably realise is that their client, their customer base, people that are buying them, are people that have bought them for 20 years. So that's their client base anyway. It's people that were born in the 80s and 90s. So let's revert to that. And that's probably what will work for them. I don't know. That's probably the science behind it.
Yeah, probably. But yeah, no, I do love a brand refresh. And yeah, that's a whole other kettle of fish as well. That project. I think you've been through that project a couple of times. I've been through it a couple of times. It is really as fun as it is. It's really stressful. There's so much stuff you realise you have to change.
Yeah.
And even the really big brands will struggle. I had my bank change their visual identity to try and become a bit more modern, and it was all the phasing of how it all came through was really interesting. The app was different to the letters I was getting. Website was all slightly different. It was a massive project.
Yeah, I think it's fine to do that so long as you're upfront about it. So the way that I've dealt with that problem before is been upfront with it and just said, look, we're a relatively small company. we haven't got huge resources. You'll see these things change over the next X amount of months.
Yeah.
This will change first, then that will change, and then that will change. I think that's probably fine. I guess if you're,
I really like
a massive
that.
bank,
And that sort of goes back to some of the points we were talking about earlier of how your brand comes across in various different channels, like delivering that message. We had a data leak one time, and our tone of voice and everything was really casual. And you think, oh, this is quite a serious thing.
yeah,
But yeah, we were able to communicate our customers in a really fun way, like, oh fuck, we've messed up, type of thing. And everyone loved it. People were replying to it. These messages were like, oh, don't worry, guys, that's fine. It's not a problem at all. But if we just
lose more of my data, that's fine.
if we'd done some uber formal thing, they'd be like, oh, this is a bit weird. Maybe I should worry. This has been written by a lawyer, something like that.
I heard this story a while ago that, again, it's not B2B, but I think it was Gymshark, and they had I'm pretty sure the story goes that they were on the Spotify platform. They moved to something else, and then there was an issue with loads of their orders getting misplaced and not being sent through, and all the rest of it. So they eventually moved back to the Spotify platform. Excuse me, but when that issue happened, Ben Francis, the founder of Gymshark, wrote personal letters out to sort of all the customers that affected, and that just speaks to their authenticity, I suppose, as a brand. Is like, we fucked up, guys, and we're really sorry. Ben was the one who was like, my bad, I'm responsible.
It'll only increase loyalty and just likeness of that brand when you can deliver experiences like that. People are very forgiving. Edit these coughs out. I've definitely caught something on the plane.
Hope not.
Cool. And I think we've covered a lot about brand and what it found, isn't it? In an off the cuff, roundabout way. We definitely want to follow up on some of this stuff, and I think we should provide some assets and sort of loads of stuff on some of these elements. Brand positioning, brand storytelling. What brand equity is, how you can measure. Brand. There's so much stuff that we can talk about, and this is part of the problem, isn't it? It's not a simple part of setting up a business, but it makes such a huge impact. So I guess if there's anything, if people are listening, if there's anything you want to dive into a bit more, or anything, drop us a comment, drop us an email to Scott or Dan at Brandtail, and we'd love to go into it. I'm sure we're going to bring up this topic hundreds of times in various seasons, episodes. So we may talk about the same stuff. We're aging. We'll probably just forget and the same case studies, but it's all still relevant. So Dan, is there anything else you want to add on with brands? Anything what founders people know about brand or?
No, I think from a founder's perspective, I think the sort of lasting thought is, don't be scared to dive into it. It is really important. And whilst as a founder of a business, there's, about 10 plates that you're spinning and there's lots of things that are important. Ultimately, your reputation is something that's going to pull you through the difficult times, and obviously, and help you sort of, get through the good times as well. So I think it's an important thing to get right. It needs to, I think often it needs to be led by the founder. With good stewardship from, a good professional or a good agency that sort of really understands this stuff. So, my message would just be: don't be scared of it. Jump into it. Look into the stuff. And equally, if you have questions and you just want to, natter about brand for 10 minutes, that's the reason I get out of bed in the morning. So give me a call.
Absolutely. Saying that at 8 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday, recording a podcast. I think my final message about brand is to not worry too much about the visual side of it. Focus more on your actual the core elements of a brand, like you were just covering there. Focus on that, get that right first, and then worry about if you've already got a visual that you've come up with. Don't worry about having it for a period of time before thinking about changing it. Let's just get the core elements right first, because you could have the ugliest visuals ever, but if you've got those brand elements sorted, you will be okay.
Yeah,
It's
100%. Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Your reputation is more important than the way it
reputation's more
looks.
important.
Often.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so I think that's because I think a lot of people put a lot of weight on the visual side of that, and then forget about these really core elements. I think that's just my final message.
100%.
But yeah, thank you for listening. Episode 3 coming up soon. We're going to be talking about what we would do in the first 30, 60, 90 days in a senior marketing
Big
role. So
topic.
a really good one. But yeah, thanks for listening and have a good day.